When I came out of the closet as a monarchist, one of my friends from church put the following objection to me. Of all the Orthodox monarchs in history, how many of them are canonized saints? What is the percentage of good kings to bad kings? Sure, we've had some holy kings and emperors, but certainly these are exceptions to the rule. Isn't monarchy just a genetic lottery? Wouldn't it be wiser if we simply cut our losses and stuck with elected representatives instead? Of course, any monarchy is bound to produce several mediocre sovereigns, or worse, a few evil, heretical, and tyrannical ones. For every Saint Tsar Nicholas, you might also get a Peter. For every Saint Constantine, you might also get a Julian the Apostate. All monarchs are sinful men. Some are great, most are mediocre, and a few are downright terrible. Nevertheless, I'm convinced that even bad monarchs, as long as they are Orthodox, are almost always superior to good presidents and prime ministers, if such a thing could even exist. Today, I'll explain why. Let's dive in. As I discussed briefly in my last video, all monarchs are imperfect and sinful human beings. But in this, they are not unique, since all men are sinful. Critics of monarchy tend to apply a higher standard to kings than to elected leaders. Any system of government composed of fallible humans will be rife with evil and corruption. Republics are no exception. There's no guarantee that a majority vote will select good, honest, and capable rulers. As Constantine Pobyedonostsev says, ignoring that the evils of autocracy are the evils of society itself, men of intellect and knowledge have laid the responsibility for their misfortunes on their rulers and on their systems of government, and imagined that by substituting for these systems government by the will of the people, or representative government, society would be delivered from all the evils and violence which it endured. What is the result? The result is that, the name having been changed, all has remained essentially as before. And men, retaining the weaknesses and failings of their nature, have transfused in the new institutions their former impulses and tendencies. In short, elected politicians are not necessarily any better than kings. But in truth, the situation is far worse for Republicans. Monarchy incentivizes virtue in both the sovereign and his subjects, while democracy brings out the worst tendencies in man. Elections are not sacraments, no matter how much some people want to treat them that way. The democratic process is nothing other than a glorified popularity contest. By contrast, coronations are sacraments. Coronation ceremonies varied widely depending on time and place, but Christian sovereigns were traditionally anointed in a liturgical rite whereby the king received God's grace. In a democracy, the only people with the resources and the desire to run for high office are almost always, with few exceptions, the worst people: vain, greedy, power-hungry, and corrupt. Politicians are incentivized to lie their way into office, cynically buying votes with empty promises, whipping the mob into a frenzy with deceit and demagoguery. It's no mystery why the word politician has become essentially synonymous with dishonesty and corruption. While hunger for power is arguably a prerequisite for elected leaders, that isn't necessarily the case for kings. Most monarchies have been hereditary. Therefore, in general, most monarchs didn't actively seek out the throne. Rather, kings ascended to power whether they wanted it or not. Some have even assumed the throne reluctantly, feeling themselves unworthy or unprepared, but nevertheless donning the crown out of a sense of duty. Elected heads of state are fundamentally secular, and their authority is believed to come from below, not from above. As a result, modern politicians tend to think they've earned their position through sheer force of personality. There is no sense of humility or accountability before God. Since monarchs received their authority from God, they were also accountable to God. There was a genuine feeling that the king had a duty to protect and preserve his people, to defend the church, and to rule over all of his subjects with justice. The various prayers and oaths in Christian coronation ceremonies vividly brought these ideas to life. Christian kings prayed to the living God. On the other hand, U.S. presidents make a soulless and hollow oath to uphold a piece of paper. The contrast couldn't be more clear. By necessity, politicians belong to political parties. Despite claiming to represent all of their constituents, the truth is that they only represent the interests of their party. Inevitably, half of the electorate feels that they aren't represented by any given president. Therefore, democracy exacerbates partisanship and division in the body politic. Unlike elected leaders, monarchs don't belong to political parties, so they are uniquely positioned to represent all of their subjects and rise above political partisanship. The best kings led by example, modeling their conduct after the King of Kings. In Western Europe, a beautiful tradition developed whereby Christian sovereigns would give alms and wash the feet of the poor on Holy Thursday. Likewise, a number of righteous kings like Charles I, Nicholas II, and Louis XVI willingly laid down their lives for their people. Despite being unjustly condemned to death, Louis XVI forgave and prayed for his persecutors. This kind of Christ-like service and sacrifice is almost unthinkable from our contemporary rulers. Monarchy and democracy represent opposite views of government ownership. The former is private ownership of government, whereas the latter is public ownership of government. In a monarchy, the reigning monarch effectively possesses the government for life, often with the intent of passing it down to his heirs. This dynamic fosters a deep-seated commitment to prudent governance. Much like the head of a family business who diligently stewards the company with the goal of preserving it for his son, monarchs are driven by the imperative of safeguarding their legacy. After all, people are naturally inclined to nurture and protect what they perceive as their own. By contrast, in a democracy, no politician can claim to own the state. He is merely a temporary caretaker, a renter, not an owner. With no personal stake in the long-term health of the state, elected leaders have no incentive to think beyond the next election. Monarchy cultivates a sense of duty and selfless service. Kingship only makes sense in the context of a hierarchical worldview, which, of course, is the correct view of the world. Meanwhile, the democratic ethos enshrines a rights-based view of ethics and a leveling egalitarianism. When these ideas are internalized, the result is nothing less than a spiritual disease, the symptoms of which include a sense of entitlement and selfish individualism. As Father Stephen Freeman recently pointed out, the classical world of Orthodox Christianity is profoundly undemocratic. It holds that the universe and everything that exists is hierarchical. Democratic spirituality distrusts all hierarchy. Anything that challenges the myth of equality is experienced as a threat. What makes a ruler good or bad? Obviously, this is a subjective determination. As an Orthodox Christian, I place higher emphasis on a ruler's faith and on his virtues than on his material success. In other words, more important than wise domestic policies or glorious military victories are questions like the following. Was he a faithful Christian? Did he defend and promote the church? Did he seek first the salvation of his subjects? Earlier, I claimed that even the worst monarchs, if they are Orthodox, are almost always superior to good presidents. To see some concrete examples of this reality, let's briefly examine the lives of two bad Orthodox sovereigns, Byzantine Emperor Michael III and Russian Empress Catherine II. Michael III was Byzantine Emperor from 842 to 867. He was only 2 years old when his father died, so a significant part of his reign was under a regency led by his mother, Saint Theodora, and an influential court official, Saint Theophilos. Theodora ended the second phase of iconoclasm at the Council of Constantinople in 843. This was the triumph of orthodoxy, which we celebrate on the first week of Great Lent. Unfortunately, Michael turned out to be a degenerate young man, interested more in wine, women, and song than statecraft. In the 850s, Michael began to have a relationship with Eudoxia Ingerina. Theodora and Theophilos didn't approve of this match whatsoever, possibly in part because she came from an iconoclastic family. Instead, they arranged for him to marry Eudoxia Decapolitissa. Michael married her but continued an affair with Eudoxia Ingerina. At this point, Theodora's brother Bardas stepped in and began to stoke Michael's resentment. In 855, Michael conspired with Bardas to successfully assassinate Theophilos. The next year, he deposed Theodora and sent her to a monastery. She retired in peace. Bardas was now the power behind the throne. During this time, Michael took a man named Basil from Macedonia as his chamberlain. This was the future Emperor Basil I. In 866, Michael and Basil conspired to kill Bardas. Then Basil was adopted as Michael's son and named co-emperor. At this point, Michael married his mistress, Eudoxia Ingerina, to Basil. Presumably, this was the emperor's way of keeping her close to the court, where they could continue their affair. In return for his use of Ingerina, Michael gave his own eldest sister, Thecla, to Basil as a mistress. If this whole love triangle wasn't disgusting enough, Thecla was previously living as a nun, so she had to be recalled from monastic life. Despite his personal sinfulness, Michael sponsored the missions of Saints Cyril and Methodius. In 864, he secured the conversion of Bulgaria under Saint Boris I, and even became Boris's godfather. Michael doesn't come across as an exemplary Christian. He was guilty of fornication, adultery, wife-swapping, and murder. All signs point to the conclusion that Michael's faith was nominal at best. But even so, he was Orthodox. For that reason alone, Michael could send Saints Cyril and Methodius to convert the Slavs and contribute to the salvation of many nations. Regarding iconoclasm, that heresy was defeated during the Regency, when the emperor was just a boy. Therefore, Michael likely had little involvement in that. Nevertheless, the triumph of orthodoxy was only possible because Michael's court was filled with Orthodox Christians, including 2 saints. Catherine II, known as Catherine the Great by her contemporary admirers, was Empress of Russia from 1762 to 1796. Before coming to prominence, Catherine was the clumsy, unwanted daughter of a minor German aristocratic family. However, she turned out to be a clever and winsome young woman with high ambitions. Through a fortunate series of events, she found herself married to Peter Ulrich, the future Peter III, nephew of Empress Elizabeth and heir to the Russian throne. However, their marriage was deeply unhappy and they both began to have extramarital affairs. Peter III became emperor in 1762 after the death of his aunt, the Empress Elizabeth. But Peter was as terrible a king as he was a husband. That same year, Catherine usurped her husband and took the throne for herself. Peter was forced to abdicate and died from mysterious circumstances, likely murdered by one of the conspirators. Catherine's 34-year reign was a mix of good and bad. Catherine concerned herself with the protection of Orthodox Christians under Ottoman rule. She twice went to war with the Turks, partially motivated by her desire to partition the Ottoman Empire and restore the Eastern Roman Empire in some form centered in Constantinople. Unfortunately, she was less kind to the church in Russia. Catherine nationalized church lands to finance the state, forcing many to close. Catherine saw herself as an enlightened despot, and she famously associated with the likes of Voltaire. She also provided asylum for the Jesuits after they were suppressed by Pope Clement XIV. By this act, Catherine almost single-handedly saved the Jesuit order. In her personal life, Catherine had a string of lovers and garnered a well-earned reputation for sexual immorality. Much more could be said about Catherine and her reign. In my opinion, she ranks poorly. I think she was a pretty terrible monarch. Nevertheless, she made an absolutely brilliant decision when it came to Alaska. Russian colonization of Alaska had begun in 1741, about 21 years before Catherine came to the throne. In 1794, the Russian-American Company petitioned the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church to provide a priest for the native Alaskans. The Empress Catherine decided instead to send an entire mission to America. One of these missionaries was the humble monk Saint Herman of Alaska. Like Michael III, Catherine was not a pious Orthodox empress. Her sins are actually very reminiscent of Michael's. She too was guilty of sexual sins like fornication and adultery. It's likely she was also complicit in the murder of her husband. But again, she was Orthodox, even if her faith was nominal. For that reason alone, Catherine could send Saint Herman. Name any president or prime minister who sent a Christian missionary anywhere. Despite feigning neutrality in matters of religion, there is no such thing as a state without a religion, and America's regime is no exception. The United States is zealous, just not for Christianity. Liberalism is our religion. Instead of saintly missionaries, our chief exports are regime change and sodomy. With the sole caveat that they are Orthodox, even bad kings are usually preferable to the best that liberal democracy has to offer. But what about non-Orthodox sovereigns? Admittedly, it would be more difficult to argue for the superiority of all monarchs in general, because so many were heterodox or heretical. However, sometimes even heretical rulers do great things that would be unthinkable from contemporary heads of state. In closing, let's take a look at just one example: Michael III's father, the Emperor Theophilos. Theophilos was a heretic. Specifically, he was a stubborn iconoclast. However, his stepmother was Euphrosyne, and she was secretly an iconodule. When Theophilos was ready to marry, Euphrosyne arranged a bride show for him. Out of all the candidates, Saint Theodora was chosen to be the emperor's wife. Theophilos was almost certainly unaware that Theodora, like Euphrosyne, was a covert iconodule. Nevertheless, by this providential marriage, the days of iconoclasm were officially numbered. As we've seen, the empress would outlive her husband and put a final end to iconoclasm. Therefore, Theophilos indirectly played a crucial role in the demise of the heresy he so passionately worked to promote. Although Saint Theodora was his final choice, Theophilos nearly chose to marry another holy woman, Saint Cassiani, who was also present at the bride show. Cassiani was not destined to become empress. Instead, she became a nun and a celebrated hymn writer. One day, Cassiani found herself sitting in the gardens of her monastery, composing a penitential hymn. As she finished writing the verse which says, "I will embrace and kiss your sacred feet and wipe them again with the tresses of my hair," she was informed that the emperor was on his way to visit the convent. Not wishing to see him, the holy nun quickly hid herself. However, she had left behind her scroll and the pen with which she had been composing her hymn. Theophilos discovered the half-completed work and added a line of his own. "The feet at whose sound Eve hid herself in fear when she heard your footsteps while you were walking in paradise at twilight." Saint Cassiani evidently liked this so much that it remained in the final version of her work, today known as the Hymn of Cassiani. Over 1,000 years later, this is one of the most beautiful hymns in the Orthodox Church, and it is sung every year on Holy Wednesday. All things considered, Theophilos was not a good emperor. Nevertheless, his profound eloquence is preserved in one of the most celebrated liturgical hymns of Holy Week. It goes without saying that such a legacy is unthinkable from modern politicians. In conclusion, no form of government composed of fallible humans is free of moral stain. Nevertheless, we've seen that even the worst Orthodox sovereigns, like Catherine II and Michael III, are preferable to the very best that liberal democracy has to offer. Writing about Catherine, Father Joseph Gleason says, "Would I prefer a ruler who is a humble, godly, and faithful Orthodox Christian? Of course. But look at what good fruit can come from even a very imperfect Orthodox ruler." I think it's obvious that Orthodox monarchy simply produces better fruit than liberal democracy. Even when the branches are a little shabby, the tree has Christ at the roots. Liberalism is like a tree that's dead and rotten to the core. My friend had asked how many Orthodox kings were saints. I didn't know it at the time, but lately I've been researching Byzantine history, and it turns out that approximately 11 of the 93 emperors, depending on how you count, are canonized saints. That's about 12%, if you only factor in the senior emperors who reigned in their own right and not any empresses or junior co-emperors. It would be even higher if you removed the iconoclast emperors and the lone pagan emperor Julian. And of course, that's not to mention the Orthodox royal saints from Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Georgia, and elsewhere. By contrast, how many canonized saints are there among all the world's elected leaders? 0. At the end of the day, Orthodox monarchs and liberal heads of state aren't even playing in the same league. To prefer democracy because there have been some bad kings is kind of like preferring the local Little League team over a professional baseball team. Sure, the benchwarmer in the athletics dugout might be terrible relative to his peers, but he's still far superior to the cleanup hitter of the Little League team. In the same way, even the worst Orthodox monarchs are preferable to the best presidents and prime ministers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe. As always, please share this video with anyone you know who might be interested in this content. With that, I'll see you guys next time.